Hello and welcome to the Asian American Forward podcast. My name is Katie Simpson and I'm here this week just with my co-host Don Sun. We're catching up again after having some guests on with us last week. Don, how are you?
Good. Nice to see you and nice to see everyone here again.
And it's good to see everyone. I feel like in the last few weeks, things have really, at least in California, started to return to normal. So I'm very much having that spring feeling. But we have kind of a serious topic today. We are going to talk today through, sort of as the US has returned to normal or is slowly moving back towards whatever our baseline level was before the coronavirus pandemic, we have seen an increase in gun violence, particularly with the two mass shootings in last month in March that took place, one in Atlanta targeting Asian-owned massage parlors, and then there was another shooting at a King Soopers grocery store in Boulder, Colorado. And a lot of the reporting that I was seeing around these events that kind of happened within about a week of each other was that these shootings kind of represent a tragic return to normal for America, that before the pandemic, particularly in the late winter, early spring, we would see just large amounts of high casualty gun violence related deaths. So we wanted to talk through the issue of gun violence and also just sort of kind of think through gun control, kind of the flip side of that coin, and how we can respond to that, also sort of touching on specific issues related to the Asian American community. Don, you kind of suggested this as a topic, so I want to give you a chance to say if there's something particular on your mind about why you think we should be talking about this now.
Yeah, I think it's by political instincts. I always think ahead and what's the future or near future, what's kind of a social, political environment, and also what's kind of instant ahead before it's happening. So it's the anti-Asian hate crime has been in my mind hunting for over years. Now it's becoming kind of a trend, sadly. And also it's when I mentioned the gun control or gun issue to you, it's not simply because two incidents happened. And also I think there's another one happened in Minnesota recently. So it's all these kind of things is after anti-Asian hate crime, gun violence is going to be becoming much more serious issue. And this issue, gun related issue, has been pondering in my mind, also from a legal side and the political side, and link to the American history, even go to the Constitution, Second Amendment. All these kind of things is, I think it's time to bring up, to get up again, to talk about it, because it's although I'm very pessimistic on a lot of things when we talk, but in action side of my mind, I always think is that we still can have a lot of things to do. And if we prepare well and think well, there's a lot of room for us to improve our human society and for this country if all politicians pay attention and also design some policy or bills, and there are still some room. And also you see the trend, both Democratic Party and the Republican Party, more and more people realize that gun control is going to be not the number one, but on the top of people's priority. That's why I try to, let's talk about this one.
Mm-hmm. And I think already in your kind of discussion there, you're pulling out some of the tensions that I wanted to talk about today, which is gun violence is a really huge topic. And so you referenced the shooting in Minnesota. Are you referring to the officer involved incident? I'm going to look up the name. Yeah. So there's a big difference, I feel between an officer involved shooting or gun violence death at hands of the police versus a gun violence death that's just a domestic dispute, for example, or even just an accident, which is fairly common. I was looking at some statistics from the Gun Violence Archive, which just like tracks deaths related to guns. And their most recent statistics are from 2020. So they've like completed from last year. And out of the total 43,546 gun violence deaths in 2020, over half of those were suicides. So that's like a whole other dimension of the issue. Generally, we see that like when we talk about gun violence and gun control, the first thing that comes to people's minds is like mass shooting events, particularly at schools, targeting like children. But it's also like such a big issue that like encompasses everything from like mental health, with suicides being kind of the most common cause of gun deaths, to like racism and police violence. So like how do you kind of differentiate between those different types of gun violence, and do you have like a perspective about different approaches that we should take to those events?
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's the gun control. The movement has been started from U.S. president level, Supreme Court level, and also state level and city level. So each level is going to dealing with a different gun violence. The number one issue is we try to analyze what's the mass shooting, how we can prevent the mass killing. This is the number one priority, because this is going to cause the entire society mental status and the trend that people going to either go to the extreme to do more, or it's that we can find some way to control it. But in the past, we have failed on the federal level. So it's my approach is going to looking for some alternative, start from a state level, and also start from a more progressive state, and also from a city level, because it's among all the cities mayor, a lot of mayor, they promote the gun control and put some restriction on the assault weapons. Those ones we can reach consensus very easily, instead of fighting with the NRA at the national level. That's the political power is very strong, and it's very hard to break down. And also it's in the middle or west state, it's very hard to convince them. This right state, they are very, very pro-gun and take it Second Amendment, their fundamental right. So it's pretty hard to get a start from there. But locally, we can do it. Also, it's based on my experience doing business. I think if the social movement that can plus some business interest into this gun control, the factors, it's going to help a lot. I have several people has been promote a bill to put the insurance company into this join this team. So it's it's money always talk, and follow the money is always at least in my mind is always a philosophy. If anything happen, we always looking for money, where the money coming from, where money go, and how we put the money inside the formula or equation. So it's put insurance company as one of anti-gun control is going to give a insurance company some money. And every gun owners, every different gun, you can charge different tax rate, or it's a license fee, and then make sure it's a gun owner has to pay heavy tax and increase the state or city or federal income. At the meantime, it's that they are going to much appreciate the value of the ownership of a gun. And also is we put a heavy tax on the assault weapon if we cannot destroy assault weapon. But if we put a heavy tax on the assault weapon, it's going to reduce the inventory of the ownership of an assault weapon. So for the handgun, those kind of self-defense weapon, and I think at this moment it's pretty hard to control, and also it's a kind of necessary for self-defense. That's basically my approach.
So I want to ask a follow-up question about so are you saying insurance like companies are supporting gun control, or are you saying they support lack of gun control?
they are going to support gun control because it's every gun. If you pass the law or bill to enforce everyone who own the gun, they're going to pay the tax. Assault weapon, they're going to pay like annually like $500 to own assault weapon, and for the handgun maybe pay $100. Have a different tax, the insurance rate. So that can be calculated by the calculators. They can do it themselves. But it's going to, on the one side, we build alliance among the individual, because the anti-gun control, it's a very loose grassroots. A lot of a victim family, they build the foundation, but that's the powerless. Just like you don't have a key to against your enemy. You just yelling, shouting, crying, but that doesn't work in the political the environment. So you have to build an alliance, and I think it's a business world. Insurance is the number one to against the NRA because they are equally powerful in terms of money. So that's if we can bring insurance company in, that's the change the equation. That's the alternative approach, at least for me. I think this trend is going to be quickly happen. And the second level is that I always emphasize all politics is local. And if we can have a national mayor conference and emphasize the gun control for each municipal level, the government, and put some restriction on the gun shop and the shooting range, and also it's some of the ammunition restriction and the safety measurement on the city level, is going to put a lot of breaks in the gun violence happening. The answer your another question is whether it's a suicide or it's a mass violence. That's I always emphasize on the mass shooting. That's going to have a huge social impact. Suicide is pretty hard to control. That's only can go through the family or individuals. It's regarding the mental health issue. It's pretty challenging at this moment. I don't have a concrete solution for that part yet.
Right. Yeah, I think it does strike me as really interesting that like we talk about gun violence kind of as it's one problem that we have to fix, but I think it's actually like many problems, because there's like mass shootings, which generally are defined as like events with 4 or more casualties that are not related to a crime, some other like event. So like if there was a crime spree or an armed robbery where 4 people died, that would not qualify as a mass shooting. Or if it was like related to a romantic dispute, also doesn't get counted in the gun violence, like mass shooting description, according to the Congressional Research Service definition that I was reading before this. So I think it's just important to like point out all of the different like nuances. And we haven't even really talked about like officer involved shootings or police violence, which is like a whole different issue, because as far as I know, I don't think it's a real political possibility that we would, limit weapons among the police force. So that also has to be approached like in a completely different way than just saying like an assault weapons ban or some kind of tax or like limiting gun show loopholes. So I just wanted to like pull out all of those different nuances as we were having this discussion. But I also kind of want to turn the conversation to another specific issue, which is that the recent shooting in Atlanta was specifically targeting Asian-owned businesses, and we have been talking a lot about hate crimes on the show. And so I was reading some reporting from NPR this past week about how Asian Americans are coping with the rise in attacks in the recent years. When we were talking with Gigi Lee and Sandra Ung, they talked about having neighborhood walks and offering escort services for the elderly. But another sort of trend that is emerging, and I think this is particularly in Southern California, but maybe you can speak to some other locations. Asian Americans are kind of organizing to take up firearms for self-defense and to like do gun training. So I wanted to like get your reaction to that. as a response, and then we can maybe talk a little bit about your own personal philosophy of gun ownership.
Yeah, and I think it's the entire Asian community, especially for the Los Angeles, Southern California. They pretty much it's a pro-gun ownership, and also it's a people has been learned from I think it's 2008 or it's or 2012. I forgot that exact year. There have some Korean American. They have used the gun to against the road, and also it's they set up the gun on each store to protect their street, especially Korean town there. So it anyone is go to the robbery their store, or it's just smashing their door, they just try to self-defense, use gun. And several shooting happened, and the entire Korean town, nobody going to dare to go there anymore. So it's becoming a very safe place.
Was
So
this recently in
no, that's I think it's probably almost 10 years ago, because
okay.
Ronnie King, you remember the Ronnie King road?
I don't.
Yeah, the Ronnie King is a black has been.
Oh, Rodney King. Rodney King, right? Yeah. That was like might have been before I was born, actually.
Oh yeah, it's pretty early, but it's after that event, the Korean community, they response is a huge. The surge buy the gun. They buy the gun to protect themselves. So this type of this wave of anti-Asian hate crime, especially after Atlantic City, the people start to buy the gun in Chinese community, because they think it's the only gun can protect them and help them. So a lot of people go to the shooting range, buy the gun, have the training. And also, you know, the karaoke, the kung fu, it's all the training classes started. It's booming. It's I say I have a couple of friends. They have classes now. It's all packed. It's everyone want to learn how to self-defense. That's trend. Is I personally think is I'm not against it, but it's also very very risky. If you use a gun to self-defense, you're risking you may be dealing with a professional criminals. They probably use gun much familiar, much better than you are. So it's there's a double-edged sword. So whether it's a good ideas or bad ideas, at this moment, I think it's pretty hard to make a decision or judge it. I personally has been own the gun by myself. It's I just say it's cool. I don't say it's as a defense, but
yeah,
as long as you have a handgun at home, you feel much safer. Honestly, I have to tell you, that's kind of a feeling I have. And even you seldom always, I couldn't even remember where I put the gun is in my house. But it's you feel much safer. That's the way. But if you give the entire society, every Chinese citizen or Asian American that have a gun at home, I think it's the robber or it's a criminal violence is going to be a little bit scared away from your residence. That's the one side. The other side is I always think self-defense by using gun is not the real solution. It's pretty dangerous. So be careful.
Yeah, I mean, generally, if you do research on stand your ground laws, which are just generally like laws that would protect you from prosecution if you're acting in self-defense. So, for example, if you kill someone in self-defense or just shoot someone in first defense, they don't tend to make you more safe. You tend to end up just having a gun in the room kind of like raises the stakes of whatever conversation. And that's personally why I don't own any guns. And my family and I have had many conversations about this. My brother owns a few guns. My dad always wants to buy a gun for the house. And my mom and I are like, absolutely not. Have you ever heard us argue and you want to have guns in the house for those conversations? Like, that's insane to me. But yeah, the evidence on stand your ground laws kind of keeping you safe are inconclusive. So, but I want to ask, like, do you have more than one gun?
Just one.
Just one. And do you like take it out like to the shooting range, like for recreation, or do you just like have it in the house?
Take to the shooting range for recreation. That's become it's a pretty exciting experience. You need to cover your ear. It's just so loud that the gun explored.
I've never been. I'd like to go sometime to a shooting range just to like experience it. I've only shot like a little BB gun like when I was a kid. Have you ever gone hunting either? I've never done that.
No, not gun hunting yet. Several people invite me to go to the gun hunting, but it's a pretty time consuming. I have to go travel a lot, and also it's a stay there for quite a while. And maybe someday I can go.
So we kind of like bring up this point then that you're sort of not on the side of like severely limiting the amount of guns. Well, so you'd like to like impose a tax, so fewer guns available, but you're not pro banning all guns. I just kind of like want to get your perspective, especially as an immigrant, because you didn't grow up with gun culture. I lived in Tennessee when I was I lived in Indiana when I was a young kid, and then in Tennessee in like middle and high school. So both fairly Republican states, especially more so in Tennessee because I lived in a kind of rural area. Gun ownership is a big deal. Lots of people hunt just for recreation, obviously. And so I'm curious, as someone who grew up in a country that doesn't have the same sort of gun culture as the US, like what your perspective on the Second Amendment in general is, and like what things you've noticed about our sort of Americans' culture and American people's relationships to firearms.
Yeah, there's some transition in my mind at the very beginning that I prefer totally gun control. It's the non-gun society is the most safe society. That's my philosophy. But after so many years in this country and talking to people and involved in the gun-related issue, and I gradually think we have to adopt the culture and also realize that pragmatically there's no way in our generation to totally forbidden the gun ownership. So it's the realistic or political feasibility. You have to think this way. So that's the only way you can control the gun, but you cannot eliminate the gun totally. That's my approach. As long as you can control the assault weapon, always wait for the Supreme Court make some kind of a judgment about the gun control. Otherwise, there's no way you can totally eliminate the gun from society.
Mm-hmm. So how has your, like, what do you think started like changing your perspective about gun violence in America? Like, do you remember the first time there was a shooting when you lived here, and was that impactful to you? You could even tell the story of the first time you bought a gun if you want to. I'll say I studied abroad in Europe, and when I would talk, especially to older people there, I was in Croatia. They were like, my parents were a little worried about me going. They weren't too worried, but they were a little worried about like, oh, will you be safe in another country? And I came to find that is really funny, because when I was in Europe, all of the older people were like, America, it's so dangerous there. Like they think you could get shot on the street any day, which is kind of true in some ways. So I'm curious about like, if you remember the first time there was a gun violence incident that like really impacted you, and also I want to hear the story of when you bought your gun too.
Of course, I came from a country there's no gun in civilian society at all. It's China. There's anyone own guns become a criminal. So it's when I come to this country, I kind of like all kind of sports. It's a gun shooting is one of a support in my mind. So it's and one side I take it is the entertainment to have a shooting range, to have a fired gun and hit at the 10 is pretty enjoyable. And the other side is any self-defense skill or it's a tool. I think it's you get it and you use it, you are good at it. It's doesn't hurt you at all. So it's that we don't know it's our life. So anything can be happen. So if you have some kind of a skill or survival skill or tool you can use, that's going to be the plus for the for myself. And I think it's for this society. Anyone you own the gun, at the beginning is I totally against it, and now it's I'm a little bit loose, and also it's I put all my expectation on the Supreme Court or Second Amendment, and then later I found there's no chance for the 2/3 of a country, both the governor, voters, and the Supreme Court is all vote against the Capitol Hill is all vote to amendment the Second Amendment. There's always no chance to get there. So it's at this moment you have to think the other way to get reduce the gun violence compared with other civilized Western society. There's no gun and much safer than this country. No doubt about it. But when you're familiar with kind of a mass shooting happened today, happened tomorrow, and also you'll see the president. I see several times Obama has been teared after shooting, and he tried to put a bill in the Capitol Hill, but every time failed. So that kind of things really hurt people. But it's a crazy people. If a gun in their hand, you cannot control it. And this moment, I probably still waiting for maybe another movement or it's a Supreme Court. If they repack Supreme Court, put more judges or justice in the Supreme Court, more liberals or more gun control, the justice, maybe we can see some hope there.
Did you follow very much the activism of the Parkland shooting, survivors? Oh, it is Parkland. No, Parkland maybe, and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. So there was the shooting. This was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Shooting in Florida was the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. I forget where Parkland was.
Yeah.
But those were the high school students who survived the shooting. Were really active, and we kind of already talked about activism a little bit, but they were really active, speaking out against gun violence and kind of advocating for more gun control. I know that you're a big follow the money kind of guy, but what impact do you think activism like that? I know also the victims of the survivors and victims of the shooting in Watertown, Connecticut. The name of the school was Sandy Hook Elementary School. Have also been really outspoken. What do you think the impact of kind of that more personal activism is?
Yeah, it's depend on who is the leader and how tragic the degree and impact of people's mentality and bring up the awareness of an entire society. But from an insider point of view, as active in the political and the fundraising side, I know it's the old politicians try to take advantage of all this kind of a movement and have their ego enlarge and take advantage of it. The key is the activism is pretty hard to get into the real law. So unless you can combine the money and combine with the lawmaker, Congress member, senator, they all active and find some real incentive behind their political life, and then you can make change. Otherwise, it's just a very short life. The movement, it's an activity they cannot spend their whole life and take and control. Even they can, but the impact is going to gradually diminishing when the people is from a very emotional moment and go to the calm ignorance. So you don't have a mechanism to keep the momentum going unless you have some organized structure behind it and with a strong financial support. That's the key. That's also my approach. I always thinking in the other side is make sure it's we have money, we have some kind of a structure, make sure politicians, they can really move forward instead of just shouting and deliver speech. That's just for show.
Okay, one last question before we wrap up for today. You're in New York right now on the campaign trail, working very, very hard. So I want to ask, like, if there's any particular tactics related to gun control in New York City or policies that Andrew's really looking at as a candidate, or what's unique about gun control in that particular area?
I think at this moment, there's two questions. One is regarding the NYPD, the gun violence. That's the one thing is you mentioned before. On this part, it's the Andrew and at least myself, it's very, very promoted. It's use high tech and not high tech. Actually, it's you just arm with every policeman with a body camera.
Body
Make
cams,
sure
yeah.
that body camera that have a record all the instances, and then you can dramatically reduce the NYPD's police random use gun and unnecessary to use gun. And I remember I think 3 or 4 years ago, there have a police called Peter Liang, and he accidentally fired the arm in the dark, in the very, very late in the morning, maybe 2 a.m. and walking into the dark, the hallway, and heard something wrong. It's because they respond to domestic violence, and his gun is just accidentally fired up, and the bullet hit the wall, and the bullet hit the wall and bounced back, killed one people. So he was charged with the second-degree murder. That's kind of things that cause the entire nation's Asian to try to protect him, because most people.
Hey, you're back. There we go.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
Most people, they think it's a police gun violence. If accidentally, it's 99%. It's a go walk free. Only this police officer, because he's a Chinese, got put into the jail and try to sentence it. I remember that's the very, very dramatic movement nationwide. So I write the article to New York Times, try to protect him. But that one is later we write a letter to the judges, and the judge finally made the decision to release him without any charge of a criminal charge. That's the one thing. And for this one, the second thing is I think Andrew's probably more emphasized on the increase the police budget and do not defund the police. This is very, very against the progressive. Progressive is always say they want to defund the police as a solution, but Andrew says the safety is the number one priority for most New Yorkers. And as long as we can reform police, put the responsibility and based on the merit to promote excellent police officer and increase safety is number one priority for New Yorkers. And that's the basic policy for Andrew. And I think the people like his policy on this part.
Well, we will wrap it up there. I had to get a little New York campaign news in since we're off this week and it's just the two of us. But Don, thanks for talking with me as always.
My pleasure too. And also I like this subject, and also we welcome all the audience and the listeners. If they have some comment that we can join us together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We will wrap it up there for this week. My name is Katie Simpson. Our podcast is sponsored by Asian American Forward. You can visit our website at www.asianamericanforward.com. If you enjoyed the show this week or have a topic you'd like to hear us discuss on a future episode, you can send us your comments at our email, info@asianamericanforward.com. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you think about gun control. Do you own any guns? Whatever, we want to hear from you. You can also find us on Facebook and hear more conversations between Dawn and I at our YouTube channel. If you're a fan of the show, leave us a review in the Apple Podcast Store or tell someone about us really helps people find the show. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thank you.